We are very excited to have everyone here Friday afternoon. If you're on East Coast time, we know we've got folks joining from a lot of different places all over the world. Very excited to welcome you to today's Bridges webinar. We have a couple quick introductions and housekeeping items to cover before we get started. My name is Cody. I'm the Director of Coaching Operations at Paragon One, and really happy to share with you this Bridges webinar. This is the 5th of 7 Bridges webinars. So there's still more to come. If you like what you see today, stay tuned. We'll share a link for you to join the other webinars later. But as we get started today, and as you get settled into this Zoom room, I want to remind you all that we want to hear from you. We want to see you. We want to hear you. Please get settled, update your name, turn on your camera, and make sure you submit your questions in the Zoom chat. I'll be moderating that here in just a moment. So please send your questions and share your thoughts and affirmations. We want to see those emojis in the Zoom chat today as well. And with those few housekeeping tips covered, I'm really excited. And it's honestly my pleasure to introduce your moderator, Rashida Geddes. Rashida is on a mission to help diverse talent get out of their own way, cut through the noise, and bring clarity to their careers and life goals. As a career coach and senior talent leader, Rashida has been featured on major media networks, and has spoken at universities like Harvard Business School. She is an advocate for diversity, equity, and inclusion in the workplace, and is a voice for the next generation of leaders. Through her speaking, coaching, and training, Rashida is helping talent claim their power that they bring to life. Rashida, we are so excited to have you. Rashida is also an esteemed program manager with Paragon One and has led hundreds of students through the remote externships. Rashida, I'm so excited to be here with you today. Hello.
Thank you so much, Cody, for that great introduction and giving us that energy that we need to start off today's conversation. I'm excited about our panelists today, and I'm excited to be able to share and have this conversation with you all. Some of you in the audience, you may have had me as your program manager, so excited to see you again, and really want to take you into today's conversation. So without further ado, let me introduce our wonderful panelists for you today. So the first panelist that we have is Kiana Schmidl, Global Head of Culture and Inclusion at Wayfair. She creates solutions to support inclusion through authenticity and empathy. She believes that highlighting the need to move from careful to thoughtful conversations in the workplace is key to the success of an evolved workplace culture. Previously, she led diversity and inclusion at Santander Bank and worked for IBIS Consulting Group, Partners Healthcare, and Harvard University. Kiana earned her BS in Human Services and MBA in Human Resources at Fitchburg State University. Welcome, Kiana. I also want to introduce our panelist, Jonathan Mays, Senior VP and Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer at grocery store chain Albertsons. He has been named one of the top 100 diversity and inclusion executives in the US. Mays received a Bachelor of Science from Warner Pacific College and a Juris Doctorate from Willamette University College of Law in Oregon. He began his legal career in the San Francisco area, where he lives with his wife, Beretta, and has previously held leadership positions in government relations, public affairs, sustainability, philanthropy, and diversity and inclusion at Safeway, which merged with Albertsons in 2015. He is an accomplished endurance athlete, professional musician, vocalist, arranger, and band leader. Please welcome Jonathan Mays to the conversation. And last but not least, we have Joe Handy, President and CEO of the National Black MBA Association. Through his career and community involvement, he was part of the founding team at Georgia Aquarium. Handy is the recipient of the Atlantic Business League 2018 Men of Influence Award, the Georgia Senate Remarkable and Distinguished Georgian Resolution, ICABA, Atlanta's Leading Influencers Award, and Secretary of State Outstanding Georgia Citizen Award. Born and raised in New York, Handy graduated with honors from the College of New Rochelle with a liberal arts degree and earned his MBA at Kennesaw State University. Welcome, Joe Handy, to the panel. So as I mentioned, we have an amazing panel for you today of really esteemed professionals who are really well into their career with, and as I've shared, so many great accolades. But what I really want to get into today is really on their experience, their journey, and giving you insights to help you as you embark on your own journey. Now, I want to start with just a little bit of a preface around inclusion and diversity, right? According to McKinsey and Company, the business case for inclusion and diversity is stronger than ever. Data shows that the most diverse companies are now more likely than ever to outperform less diverse peers on profitability. Yet progress overall has been slow. Not to mention, diverse companies face significant challenges in creating work environments characterized by inclusive leadership. So today's conversation will really take you into that space around the journeys of each one of these panelists today, and more around how you can feel included in corporate. So let's first start off with my first question, and I'll ask it to all the panelists, and maybe we'll start with KeyAnna. Maybe you can share a little bit more about your career journey. Where did you start your career? What were some of the interests that you had, and how did you secure that first opportunity post-graduation, and then the subsequent leadership roles that took you to where you are today? So KeyAnna, if you can share and maybe start off.
Sure, happy to. And first, let me just say hello to everyone out there. Very excited to be here with you today. Looking forward to your questions, and to thank everybody for allowing me to be here today. I think my background, I like to believe, is unique, but maybe I'll find out that it's not. Some of my first jobs had nothing to do with the work that I'm doing now in some ways. Back in the day when people used to buy CDs, I worked at Strawberry's Music and Video, and had various roles while I was in college. So for me, especially in undergrad and then in graduate school, I was working full time. So it made sense for me to map what my role was, what my job was, to what I was studying in school, to try to get some of the benefit of time spent away from studying by doing. And I've always kind of had that pragmatism, I guess I would say, in the work and in building my career. A through line, though, both from school as well as through all of the roles that I've had, has been this idea of, look, there are people having different experiences than the one that they were either promised or the one that they're trying to have. And so how can we at least acknowledge that and have conversations around this? So when I graduated from undergrad, I just cold applied to a couple of different roles at Harvard University and got a call back for a role to leave their dorm at Harvard Medical School. And I was like, yeah, I'm maybe 10 minutes older than the people that are here right now, but it seems like this is the right move for me. And actually, it was in meeting with the HR person who was leading that search that she told me, I don't want you for this job. I want you to be in the dean's office. And as a person coming out of college, I was like, my wardrobe says be in the dorm. You do not have anything that maps to a dean's office, but something told me to listen to her and to trust her. And I'm glad that I did. I met some amazing human beings who took an interest in wanting to know who I was and what I wanted to do and helping me to shape my career path. And I would say every experience and every opportunity that I've had since then has been through taking advantage of just having conversations with people, whether they're deans, whether they're other students, whether it's just somebody that you meet who is talking to you on a panel and you happen to connect to something that they were saying, and just getting little nuggets of advice or hearing how they're describing you back to you, because sometimes that's hard to know for yourself. And then taking that and saying, okay, what might I do with that? And so that is slowly how I have built my career, but always with that through line of creating experiences of belonging for people. So that's what I would share with you to start.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing that, Kiana. And I love to hear that in your experience, you had others that saw the potential in you and kind of saw you where you could be in a few years and a few steps. And you were allowed to kind of grow into that. That's such a great way to start off the conversation. I know, Joe, we had a conversation and you mentioned that you had an atypical journey as well. So maybe you wanted to share a little bit about what that journey looked like.
Absolutely. I'm not going to say anything much different than what KeyAnna said, because I think that as you start to develop your own personality and develop your career path, there's these sort of, it's not necessarily a straight line. I always say I'm fortunate enough to follow a God that can still make a straight line out of a crooked stick. And that's the sort of the pathway of my career. I initially went out, I wanted to be a criminal defense attorney. So I was going down that road. And then I started working while I was in college and discovered what I really wanted to do was be in a position that I can help people. So I started working in career paths that was focused on customer service and focused on having people create these experiences that they live with, not just experiences that they leave with. So having that sort of as a baseline of where my passion was, I sort of matriculated through my career working in the attraction world, ultimately opening up Georgia Aquarium, and realized during my time there that at a moment that I was the only Black president of a zoological organization in the United States. So I was sort of fumbling around with this concept and figuring out what can I do, how can I create purpose, and how can I educate a community of all the different career paths that they may not be aware of. Coming from the streets of Harlem, I didn't have those aspirations outside of sort of this narrow career path of being a criminal defense attorney because of the environment I was in. I wanted to help my community, but I started to realize that there are more than one ways that you can get involved and help your community. So my career path was sort of this up and down, and through that, similar to Kiana, there was a thread that was woven through it, and it was a need, a passion, and sort of a calling to help people, and particularly help our people advance and help our people discover all of the opportunities that are afforded to them, or spark some opportunities that should be afforded to them.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Joe. I love that you leverage purpose and passion to really take you down different paths in your career, all with the broader goal of how can I help and change my community. And Jonathan, what about your experience? If you can share us a little bit about your journey.
When I was a little boy, I wanted to grow up and be a lawyer. And like Joe just mentioned, it happened to be a criminal defense lawyer. That's what I wanted to do when I grew up. So when I graduated from college, I wanted to take a break before I went to law school. And so I took what I thought would be a year-long job at a big financial institution. And I ended up staying there for 6 years. And I'll never forget, I was in the office late one day and I looked around the office and it was this big open area. And I said, if I do good work, maybe in 3 or 4 years, I'll be at that desk over there. And once I'm there, if I do really good work, I'll be at that desk over there. And I said, no, I'm out of here. And so I remembered my passion and decided to enroll, to apply for, and then to attend law school. My first job, though, was a great experience and foundation for my love for working with big corporations, which is what I do now. So after law school, I went to work in private practice at a law firm, and then later went in-house with one of our clients, and then went to another company as well, Safeway, the supermarket industry. And then at Safeway, I'm a new lawyer in Safeway's legal department. And I'm saying to myself, this is great. This is what I wanted to be. I wanted to be a corporate lawyer. But I asked myself, where do I want to be in 5 years? And I said, I want to be a VP in a big company. And I came to the conclusion that I probably couldn't be a VP there because there were 20 other attorneys and I'm the newest kid on the block. And so I thought, for me to be a VP in a big company, this big company, I'm going to have to move to a different department. And so the question became, what department? And so long story short, one of my passions has been politics since I was a little kid. And I used to advise the guy who's VP of government relations. He left the company. I raised my hand, was fortunate to get the job, first as director and then vice president. And then I was later promoted to a number of different roles, with government relations being one, but sustainability, philanthropy, and communications and sustainability, where I became senior vice president responsible for those 4 departments. And then the merger with Albertsons happened, that Rashida mentioned, and I was thinking that I probably was going to be leaving the company because a lot of the folks from Albertsons were taking the role. And long story short, they said to me, Jonathan, we want you to run this for the entire company. And so I was managing those 4 functions for Albertsons companies. And I gave a speech in 2016 to an outside group that was trying to figure out how they could become more diverse. Because they were looking around the room and they were saying, there's not a lot of diversity here. And they said, Jonathan, come talk to us about how we can do it. And that was not work that I was doing. Joe, you talked about a crooked path. That was not the work I was doing at the time. But I gave the speech and it caused me to think about what was the best use of my time professionally in the years I have left working for a big company. And it was then and there I decided that I wanted to dramatically go in a different path and raise my hand to become the company's chief diversity officer. And it was announced in 2017 that I took on that role.
What a story, Jonathan. Thank you so much for sharing that experience. And one thing that I've seen seeded through all of the experiences that you've all shared is this idea around following your intuition, that's been geared with passion, purpose, your own maybe mission in a sense, and finding that next best opportunity, right? Sometimes students can get bogged down in, I'm looking for the best opportunity. I'm looking for the right opportunity. I'm looking for, to be in this role at this point in my career. But what I'm hearing from each one of you is that you took the next best opportunity, and that opportunity led you on different paths to explore other areas of interest. And it also brought you probably to spaces where you may have been the one and only, right? Or spaces where you may have had to shift completely the culture of the organization. So I'm so glad to see that and hear that your experiences are so aligned. Now, of course, this webinar is about getting hired at places that include you. So I want to ask the panelists, and maybe we'll start off with Joe. What does it mean to feel included when you join a new organization? And what are some good culture signs to look for as a student when you're interviewing for, let's say, your first or second job?
What I would say is you have to have the confidence within yourself and the confidence within your abilities. And just as a company is looking for you, you should be looking at the company at things that you feel comfortable with, ensuring that it has a culture that you feel that you can thrive within, that your voice is going to be heard. So it's sort of this combination of the company wanting you and wanting to hire you because of who you are. So be who you are. And then you have to ensure that the skills and talents that you have that's going to be a good match for said company. I always look at the company and say, what are their hiring practices? Are there people that have been there for a long amount of time? And those people, do they look within the organization to promote? So those are key identifiers for me to get a better idea of what the culture is, so that I know that they have a culture or a practice or a cadence to hire from within and invest in their staff. And I look at it as I'm coming in as an employee-sumer. And the reason why I say employee-sumer is because you have a company that has a brand similar to where Jonathan is. They have products and they sell products, and your consumer makes a decision as to whether or not they're going to continue to shop at that location and they're going to continue to support that brand. The employees and if they don't like the brand or they don't like the product, they don't have to go back to Albertsons. But your employee-sumer, and that's where I say this is where I come in when I'm looking for a job or when I'm looking for an opportunity. I've got to consume the brand because I'm motivated by something different. So if I can't buy into the culture, if I can't buy into the product, if I'm not comfortable with the organization as a whole, then I am consuming that brand and start to deteriorate. So you have to couple what you want to do, who you are, and your willingness to put your time, energy, and get emotionally vested in a company, because not just because they want to hire you, but because you feel like you want to be there. So there's this sort of double parallel worlds that you have to operate within, because you're being hired, but you want to make sure that you want to spend time with that company. So that's the only advice that I would give to a lot of students or folks that are looking to join different companies. Do your research, make sure it's a culture, because that culture, if it's not the right fit for you, will eat at you and will have echoing impact for how you approach your career in the future.
Such valuable advice, Joe. And I think of that defining career move in a sense, right? That first position, second position following your graduation or internship, and the idea that you want to be in a space that you can grow, that nurtures you, that provides you with that room to continue to grow in your career.
And Rashida, can I just make one other comment?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
I would also recommend folks to be bold and ambitious. And you don't have to get it right the first time, because experience is what you get when you don't get what you want. And there are times where you will take a job and you'll realize something about yourself that may cause you to pivot and take a different career path. So don't be bold enough to be willing to try something, even if you don't think it's going to work. Jonathan and Kiana made the comment. You initially go down a path thinking this is where you want to go. And then you realize something, there's this discovery moment about you. You do a self-audit and realize you want to do something different. But had you not had that experience, you wouldn't have had something to compare it to say, you know what, I really want to go in this direction, or I am committed to this particular career path. So be willing to try different things. Don't be risk avert.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think the moment is now, especially early in your career, to really try those different things to see what sticks, right? Jonathan, what about you? You know, what can the students on the line do to feel more included and to kind of gauge that with a company?
In terms of gauging how the company fits your culture, your views, how you view the world in terms of what's important. I mean, Joe mentioned it. I would start with the company's environmental and social governance policies. And so many of them issue statements of some sort, but I really would go online to understand what is the company's commitment to the communities that it serves. What does that look like in terms of philanthropy? What does that look like in terms of environmental sustainability, if that's important to you? What does it look like for diversity, equity, inclusion, in terms of what does it look like when you look on the site? Who do you see there? What colors, what faces, what genders do you see? What does the company's board of directors look like in terms of diversity, gender, ethnically? What does the leadership team look like as well in those regards? Does the company have organizations like employee resource groups for different groups that you might align with just to help develop your skills and your expertise in the area? And so I would really look there kind of first to really understand, as Joe was talking about doing your homework, to really understand whether that might be an organization that would be a good fit for you. If you are fortunate to get an interview, virtual or otherwise, I want you going into that interview not only to have done the homework that Joe's talked about and I've talked about, but also to go in believing that if they are taking their time to talk with you, then they believe it's more likely than not that you can do the job. And so I want you to rid yourself immediately, if possible, from any notion or suggestion that might cause you to think, I'm not sure I'm good enough. I'm not sure I can do this. Really believe that they believe you can do the job, and then believe it for yourself. And I think those things can be helpful to you as you embark upon considering employment at any place you would be exploring.
Such great advice, Jonathan, and the idea of aligning your values, your personal values, with the values of the organization, because I think that allows for the best form of a partnership and a relationship between you and that organization. Kiana, what steps could potential interns or new graduates take to feel more included within large organizations?
Yeah, I think to pick up on the thread that Jonathan just shared, since I was in high school and my first job, I have always said, if I can get the interview, I can get the job. And I can count on one hand the number of times that I have interviewed and not been offered a job. I'm still quite bitter about those times. But in a career that has spanned, more than a decade, well over a decade, just to know that is partially because of the confidence of, as Jonathan said, if they're asking you to come in to talk to you, it's because they believe you are worth their time. And so if you just keep that in your head going in there, that's like 90% of the work. The rest of it is just like regurgitating the stuff that you know and being yourself. So I share that with you all, because if you feel like in that interview you cannot be yourself, or that yourself would not be accepted, that's a good litmus test right there. I think the other pieces are, at Wayfair, we're honest. We want to be honest about the representation that we have and the representation that we're lacking. And because of that, we created the Culture Ambassador Program, where we have mostly it's members of our employee resource groups, as Jonathan had mentioned, but also other folks across the organization who have raised their hand to say, I would love to have a culture conversation. with any interested candidate. And those conversations are not a part of the official interview record. They are your opportunity to decide if you want to connect with someone on a particular dimension of diversity that you have in common, or maybe you don't have it in common, but you want to know what their experience is like in the organization, and to have a conversation about, can you really dress like X here? What is it really like when you're in a meeting? What are the opportunities like? Can you tell me a story about a time where you successfully changed the directive of, your team at the level that you're at? Because you want to be able to hear how people have made an impact regardless of their level. And if you're not hearing those stories, then there's something slightly off, because everybody should have the opportunity to influence where they've got a good idea. And if you don't feel that in the organization, then really consider that. And I think that, we talked a little bit about employee resource groups. What I would also say is, where are the ongoing conversations, right? So again, something that we have at Wayfair is a series called Change Starts at Home. And these are discussions about different dimensions of diversity and intersectionality that we have as an entire organization because they're important. But aside from that, it's also, where is the evidence of everything that Jonathan and Joe has mentioned? Where's the evidence that those things are embedded in processes outside of either a DEI department or HR? And probe in those spaces, right? Because you shouldn't just be hearing about these things from HR. You should be hearing about how inclusive they are, what the sustainability is, whether you're interviewing in marketing or engineering or anywhere else in the organization. So I would leave you all with that, is to definitely trust but verify, and make sure that you all are mapping your values to look at the company's values, look at the company's people principles on the website, and see how many of those words align with what you really believe for yourself in order to be successful and what you want in the world. How much alignment exists there?
Love that so much, Kiana. You've dropped so many gems in that. So students, I hope you're picking up what Kiana is putting down, because there's lots of great advice in that. Joe, I want to turn to you, and Kiana, you touched on it. If you walk into a space and you don't necessarily feel included, you don't necessarily see representation, or there's not necessarily someone that you can connect with, it may be a red flag. But I know that, Joe, you mentioned, the work that you did with the aquarium, and Jonathan, you mentioned it as well, being one of the only ones, or not seeing anybody that looked like you. What should early talent do if they are attending, let's say, a corporate event, a corporate tour, and that they notice that no one looks like them? Have you ever been the only Black person or the only visible minority in any of your teams, groups, or organizations? And how did that impact your decision to either start with the organization, grow with them, or stay with them long term?
I'm going to say that's a violent yes. There have been many times that I have been the only in many situations, just outside of sort of my career. And the unfortunate part of that is, we as a community, we as a culture, sort of wear this sort of dual personality, because when you're in situations like that, not only do you have to be authentic to yourself, but you also represent your entire community or your entire culture. So, I mean, we have been built this way for our entire lives. And it's something that we have been able to navigate through because we have been put in that situation so many times, because we not only have to represent ourselves, but we also have to represent our entire culture, because in many cases, if we don't get it right, then there won't be someone behind us to be able to be in that position to grow that exposure. So how I handle it is, I show up. I make sure that I'm bringing my A+ game in situations like that, to understanding that not only do I have the exact perfect opportunity to reach forward and excel and continue to be ambitious with one hand, but I also have to remember that I'm reaching back and pulling people in with the other hand. So I am reaching forward and reaching back. And at that point makes me say, you better get it right. Because you've got to ensure that you are one representative of not only everything that you bring to the table, but everything that people like you bring to the table.
Love that. Love that so, so much. Thank you, Joe. And I know, Jonathan, I know that there's something that you have to share with that as well, having been the one and only in your space. Any advice that you would have for students if they move into a space or are in an environment where they don't see others that look like them?
So I completely agree with everything Joe just said. And I was just thinking back on my career. When I started work at the law firm many years ago in Oakland, California, it was a firm that had 30 attorneys. The firm also had been in operation for over 50 years. Any guesses about the number of Black attorneys that firm had ever had in its history? Yeah, Rashida raises, I see 0, yes. I was the very first one in over 50 years history of that law firm in Oakland, California. And so the pressure that Joe was talking about, I absolutely felt, because I'm not only representing myself, if you will, to do the very best that I could do to try to bring my A+ game, as Joe clearly communicated is exactly what you want to do. But also you're thinking, if I screw up, they're going to say, oh yeah, we hired one of those, he bombed, therefore we're not going to do that again. And so that, whether I like it or not, was in the background noise of all that I did. But at the same time, I needed to do what I was saying earlier, which is to say, they believe I can do the job, at least most of the people. And so I want to just bring my best, and that involves working harder, working longer, being extra prepared. I mean, all the things that you can do to help ensure your maximum success. But there's another thing. You cannot, in my view, do this well or optimally on your own. You need, and what I did was I tried to find people in the firm, fellow lawyers, who I respected, who supported my being there, and to tell them, hey, I really want your help. If you see that I'm doing something that you don't think is done the best way, don't think, boy, someone should tell him. Tell me. Go in with the humility to say, you don't know what you don't know, but other people can help you know those things. And so I would recommend, if you find yourself as the only one, find someone, it may not look like you, gender-wise, ethnically, whatever, but find someone you believe you can trust and just ask that person to be an ally, to be your eyes and ears behind your back that you can't see. And that can help you. That helped me tremendously as I was launching my career years ago. And I believe it can be helpful to you.
Thank you so much for sharing that experience, Jonathan. And it literally, allyship was the first thing that came to mind, right? We need to find allies in these spaces. And your ally may not look like you, right? They could look completely different from you, but they could have your back and have your interest and be rooting for you and in your corner. So thank you so much for sharing that piece. To the students, we will be opening it up soon for some questions, audience questions. So please be sure to add your questions in the chat so that we can, in the next few questions, be able to start getting to those. But I want to ask this next question to KeyAnna. How do you think the professional playing field has changed from when you graduated from university and started your job? And what factors come into play today that weren't present back then when you thought about your career, when you think about inclusion and where diversity is currently?
Yeah, so I love this question because I'm like, well, back in my day. But truthfully, I think one of the biggest changes is I'm an elder millennial. I will admit that. The first step is admitting it. When I graduated from college and went into the workplace, millennials were just kind of getting into the workplace. So none of us were really in leadership positions then, right? I think the biggest difference now is that now there are folks like me who are in leadership positions. And I will tell you, when you get there, you go, well, this is incredibly odd. Shouldn't somebody's like mom or dad be here to tell us what we need to do? And so I think that there is now a group of folks who are new leaders who are moving into this space in a more humble way, especially because of the numbers of generations still in the workforce. And so there are more generations in the workforce now than there have ever been. The millennial generation was the largest at the time. We have Gen Z coming quickly behind that. And what you have found with each of the generations is that they've become more socially conscious and more environmentally conscious. And so with that conscientiousness comes a shift in the expectations around the conversations that you will have at work. And along with that shift also comes the expectations that your employer will actively get involved in the community and in these discussions in ways that they were not involved before or expected to be, right? So we're actually building the framework for what corporate responsibility looks like in the modern age right now. And as you all are joining, you're joining this moment of creation, and you're joining this moment of change, and you're joining this moment of we are insisting that we sustain the momentum that we have started. And so there's an incredible opportunity for you all to come in and use your voices to amplify. These are the things that we should continue to care about, and we're not going to let off of the gas on these things. And I don't think that that was there. Certainly when I first joined the workforce, you know, for some of the stories that were being shared here, when I joined the office of the dean of the medical school at Harvard University, I was the only Black person working in that office. I'm trying to think back. Yeah, everybody else was white. And so as I was trying to find my footing in, like, you know, an office environment for the first time, I was also kind of getting feedback that I didn't really know how to take about the facial expressions I was making, about the tone that I was using. And so in terms of finding allies, I was looking for accountability buddies to say, can you just, you know, I know you'll be in this meeting. Can you just let me know if you see me making XYZ face or reacting in a certain way? Because I want to become aware of when I'm doing that. And then as I was developing in my career, it became less about, and how much do I want to change that? And more about, and how comfortable am I with this is how I am in the workplace? And that should be okay. And so I think the other thing that has changed is the expectation to code switch, right? The way that I am talking to you all now, and actually we have somebody from Wayfair on with you, and so Molly can attest to this, is the same way that I have company-wide conversations, is the same way that I talk to our CEO. And that's because it is exhausting to try to be two different people and figure out, especially when you're working from home, am I like work Kiana now? And then when my kid runs in here, I'm like, Mom, he's going to be weirded out by that. And so I think that that's the other thing, this expectation of, I just want to be my authentic self, which is why I put the emphasis on I and I show up. You're going to get this Kiana every time. And actually what you'll find is that employers appreciate that consistency. It's when they experience you in one way for a period of time, and then all of a sudden that changes, that you then start to get that friction. And so that's something else that has shifted in the workplace as I've experienced it.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Kiana, like bringing your authentic self to work and the value of doing that in some of these spaces. And I know sometimes we, you know, as part of different communities, we may try to cover those things that make us unique, but it's so important to own them, to stand in them, because there are learnings from that you're sharing with so many others. And just, you know, being able to do that in a very thoughtful and respectful way, I think is really important. Right now, we want to get to the questions. So let's start, and I'm going to give the Paragon One team a moment to set up Brian Oviedo, who has a question on inclusive communities and building them at work. So Brian, if you are, oh, great, Brian is right there. Brian, if you want to come off mute, maybe just share with the panelists where you're calling from, the university that you're attending, and then you can jump into your question.
Hi everyone, so my name is Brian Oviedo. I'm a first generation student and Latino studying at the University of Illinois. So I'm actually from Champaign as well, and studying marketing with minor in technology and management. But my question is, if the company that you work at doesn't have those employee resource groups that we know are these like inclusive communities that you can like get the support from, how do you start the conversation about like building or starting those ERGs?
Great question.
I'm happy
I
to
can.
jump in here.
Oh, Kiana, go ahead.
Oh, okay. And we'll keep jumping in because we are very excited to be speaking with you. So I apologize for cutting anyone off. But what I would say is you start one and have that conversation with your manager and tell them, I want to start this community. I think it would be important. And here's what I think that could look like. If not with your manager, have that conversation with HR. But any place that is not open to, hey, okay, talk to me a little bit more about what that would look like, then you're kind of getting some signals there. But if it doesn't exist, which should be rare at this point, you start it. And, you know, another way is to also go out if you've already found your group of people, right, who are also in the organization and say, hey, if the 5 of us come with this approach and this proposal, then it's harder for them to say no as well. So I would say talk to your manager if you feel comfortable doing that, talk to HR if you are the only one. But if you're not, find the group of folks and say, would you all be interested and can you go in on this with me?
Joe, I will defer to you and then I can follow your call. What's your preference?
Jonathan, go right ahead because I think we're going to say the same thing.
All right. Brian, in most organizations in America these days, it would give or take overall population of the company, nearly 50% women, maybe not at leadership, but just across the organization. My point is they're the largest group, if you will, that's probably underrepresented in leadership. And so to Kiana's point, if you're going to start an employee resource group, that's a good place to start. And then to look at other groups as well, Hispanic, Black, LGBTQ, age plus Asian, that sort of thing. But to start there, but don't start it just to start it. I mean, don't start it just to say you have one. The reason to have one is the business case that Rashida was talking about at the very beginning. The companies that really do a good job with regard to having strong representation of women and people of color, particularly in the leadership ranks, looking at the McKinsey study, they tend to outperform those that don't. So there's a clear business case for it. We say that we want diversity in our organizations. Well, what about retaining the people we have? Not only attracting, but how do we retain them? An employee resource group can be an important vehicle to help retain talent, diverse talent. So I could go on, but there's a strong business case for them as well. And so it's not to have them because it's kind of a cool thing to do or it's kind of politically correct. Well, no, we do this because it's good for business. It's good for the folks who work there to help them feel inclusive. They work in an inclusive environment.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Jonathan. And thank you, Kiana, for your advice. And Brian, for your question. All right, so next up, let's have Hannah. Hannah, we're gonna set you up so that you can ask your question.
Hi, everyone. My name is Hannah Shu. I'm a senior at Case Western Reserve University studying psychology with a minor in marketing. And my question was about interest in DEI work or diversity, equity, and inclusion work. What are you guys as like leadership looking for in candidates who are interested in this area?
I would defer to Kiana. My entire work is diversity, equity, and inclusion. So
Kiana, I'm not sure if you have anything that you'd share. What are you looking for when it comes to candidates that are doing this work? Or what should candidates or talent that's interested in this work do to really show up or stand out for opportunities in the space?
Sure. And I welcome both of you because I feel like this has always been my work. But I think it's, if you don't have direct experience doing the work, right? And if the question is like, how do I get experience doing the work? It's how do you go back and look at your story and understand what your lived experience has been, where you've had an experience of other, where you've had an experience of standing out in some way that connects you to DEI, right? If DEI ultimately is striving to get folks to a sense of belonging so that they can thrive, it's what about your lived experience can you connect to that work and to that drive? And then the rest of it is just like, what are the skill sets for the role that you're looking for? Some of the best folks that I have known have been the people to say like, hey, I see that you're putting out a ton of content. I actually am like a great project manager and I would be happy to come in and apply these skills. I've also got a passion in this area for this reason. And then it's like, great, I know exactly how to plug and play with you and let's just keep going. And as you kind of develop your sense of how do I approach this work, how do I come to the conversation, then it's also being able to kind of carve out your space of, okay, and then this is the role that I would see for myself.
So I hired someone last year as our manager of diversity, equity, inclusion at my company. And I just hired someone just 2 weeks ago for another role as part of the program. And I say what I'm looking for is exactly what KeyAnna was just describing. And to you, Hannah, I would, thanks for the question. To what KeyAnna said, I would just add, really do focus on what is your why. Why do you want to do this? What's drawing you to it? And again, as Rashida said, and I reiterated, understand, and KeyAnna mentioned this as well, understand why this is good, not only for you, I mean, that's nice, but why it's good for the organization that you are attempting or that you currently work with. Why is it good for the organization? Why is it good for the people there? Why is it good for the company's bottom line? Why is it good for the communities that you serve? Because part of the role involves also how do you interface with communities that are diverse. And so as part of the DEI function, you can help inform that. And so really focus on the why it is that you want to do that. And then, as KeyAnna was saying, do the prep work to understand the business case that Rashida mentioned and others have referred to as well. But I commend you for what appears to be interest in this type of work. I mean, I literally was doing very different work 5 years ago, never expecting that I would be doing work that I do now. But as I hope you can tell, I'm really passionate about what I get to do and feel really fortunate, privileged to be able to do it. And it's that kind of passion that can help drive you, I believe, to really be an effective person in this role, working in the DEI world.
Thank you so much, Jonathan, for that advice, KeyAnna, as well, and Hannah for your question. I think it's definitely important for you to know your why, because when you get in these rooms where maybe not everybody is as convinced as you that DEI is as important as it should be, you really have to use that why to kind of push you and to continue that work, to be able to continue to move some of those pieces and move the needle within your organization. Thank you, Hannah. Next up, we'll have Paige. Paige, come with your question. And I think it's so great that each one of you are really sharing your experiences, because it really does allow the students to really get a good sense of all of those different pieces. So Paige, if you wanted to introduce yourself.
Hello, my name is Paige Edwards. I'm actually a senior in high school. I haven't gone to college yet. I was just wondering, when it comes to searching companies for diversity, including race, gender, sexuality, everything, is that generally information that is open to the public? Because I want to work in STEM, and though more and more women are joining the field, it is still mainly male dominated, and I'd really like to work in a company where I'm not the only woman in the room.
Jonathan.
Yeah, and others, of course, chime in, but that is, Paige, first of all, thank you for your question. And I would say the majority of Fortune 500 companies do not provide with great transparency their stats with regard to women and people of color, particularly in leadership. Most do not. But Rashida asked the question about what has changed, right? And one of the things that has changed is a growing number of companies are beginning to share that kind of information. My company, for the first time, is going to be sharing this information this year. And so know that major thought leaders in the business world are also advocating for exactly what you're talking about, for companies to be more transparent. As I'm talking about an organization called the US Business Roundtable, or State Street, or BlackRock. There's just a number of leading thinkers with regard to what is appropriate in terms of disclosure are coming out strongly in support of it. So it's growing. We're not where we need to be, but we see a growing numbers that are beginning to share information. You can look at their board, though. The board information, if they're publicly traded, you can get a sense typically of what the makeup is there. But in terms of the makeup of people in the organization, that information is more elusive, but it's growing in terms of how frequently it's shared.
Hey, Paige, can I also lend something? And I'm searching my desk for information, and I couldn't find it readily. But there has been a new scorecard that has been developed that will tell you about diversity, equity, inclusion in companies. Unfortunately I can't find my notes with the website, but if you look it up, it is a company scorecard that will that will help you identify the culture and makeup and the diversity that exists within a said company.
And then what I would just add to that is I added links to the About Us Wayfair site, because we have a DEI page and then we have our DEI report published there. And it's not just to promote Wayfair, but to say you should be able to like do a similar search for other organizations to see if they have their content published, and to know that you can ask that in interviews, right? So don't feel like, even if it's not published, organizations are very used to hearing these questions now. And even when I was interviewing to lead DEI at places, I asked them about like their leadership representation, what they felt like their biggest gaps were in terms of representation, because I also wanted to see, would they tell me just about gender? Would they tell me about some intersectionality pieces? You know, are they going to disclose anything about accessibility and all of these other pieces, right? So I do think that it's also a look for it for sure, but if you don't see it, ask.
It's called the Corporate Equity Index.
Thank you so much, Joe, for sharing that, and Kiana for your words of advice as well. And Paige, for your question. We'll give the floor next up to Elise Hart. Elise Hart, you have a question for the panel.
Hi, my name is Elise Hart. I'm currently a junior at Baruch College, and I just wanted to know, Jonathan, what does your day-to-day work look like as a Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer?
Sure, and Kiana would like your input on that as well, because you do the same work for your organization. It really, as you might imagine, it varies. But let me just give you an example of a couple of days ago. So we have what we refer to as our National Diversity Council. It's chaired by our president and CEO. And we have a number of senior leaders who are there, the C-level folks who are part of this diversity council. And then for all of our employee resource groups, we have a point person who is over that group, so the women's group or our Black associates, et cetera, et cetera. And we talk about what we refer to as our company's aspiration. So what is our overarching goal with regard to diversity, equity, inclusion? And what is our strategy? We call it a framework. What is our strategy to achieve it? And then I give a scorecard of how we are doing as a company with regard to the elements of the strategy. And so a typical day is going to involve things like that. Yesterday, and I'll stop after that and pass the baton to Kiana. Yesterday, working on a project that asked the question, 3 years from now, where do we as a company, Albertsons companies, want to be with regard to diversity, equity, and inclusion? What do we want people to think about us, to say about us, to believe about us? And then what steps can we take to bring that to fruition? And so I could go on and on, but those are just a couple of examples. I'll give just another one and I'll pass it to Kiana, because it could just go on and on. Analyzing what our numbers look like. I mean, the question from Paige earlier about diversity. What do the numbers look like today in terms of our VPs and above who are women or who are Latinx or are Asian? What do the numbers look like today? What do the numbers look like for officers a year ago? If it's slid, why? If it's increased but barely, why? What do we want it to look like next year, 2 years from now? And what steps can we take to move that forward? So I could go for an hour talking about things that we do, but those are just a few things that we'll do in a day. Kiana, let me pass the baton to you.
Sure, and unsurprisingly, I will say ditto to everything you just said. And specifically to give some examples. So actually earlier today was reconnecting with our CEO to talk about the evolution of how do we talk about DEI in the context of ESG, right? Do we put out a social impact report? And because we work so closely with corporate responsibility, you know, we have a sustainability ERG. So I think increasingly more of my time is spent understanding how can we build this work holistically into the organization. So, you know, reviewing the inclusive marketing strategy that our marketing department wrote, but they're like, hey, this is how we've tried to interpret applying an inclusion lens. Can you kind of look over this for us? Partnering with their ERGs. We have a note that's going out around Suicide Prevention Week, right? And so we worked with our accessibility ERG because they composed our folks who are neurodivergent, so we had them weigh in on that too, right? So it's, for me, it's one of the best jobs because you get to talk to every level of employee, and you also get to be that person who maybe it's not expected that you'll be in whatever particular meeting, but once they get to know you and how you do the work, it then makes sense that you're there because you're asking the questions of how are we consistently applying an inclusion lens so that our culture is always described as inclusive and not just when we're talking about, our people areas.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Jonathan and Kiana, for sharing, and Elise for your question. I know we're coming to the last 5 minutes of the event. We have Rishi Wadwa, and who has a question. Rishi, you wanted to come off of mute, introduce yourself and ask your question.
Hi, my name is Rishi Wadwa, and I'm a junior at Rutgers Business School. And my question is, what was the process like for finding allies at your job, and specifically in the beginning of your career?
I'll take that one. I would say that in addition to allyship, because allyship, as the panelists has stated earlier, are someone within the organization that will have your back. And I would say in situations like this, you want to have co-conspirators. You want to have folks that are by your side, that are going to be there with you in the trenches. So I would look for someone that has, and I have looked for someone that is like-minded and is driven by the same passion that I'm driven on to instill change within an organization. So I would just find out who your co-conspirators are, who are having the same sort of level of energy and to put towards creating change within your company, and come together and get those co-conspirators together. And once again, there's a groundswell in numbers to be able to have those conversations within the company. But find out people that are like-minded as you.
Great advice. Thank you so much, Joe. And we're going to try to squeeze in one more question from Sanjita. So if we can get Sanjita on for her last question of the event, that would be great. And for the panelists, if you can maybe keep it a brief answer for Sanjita's question, because I know it can definitely go in different directions. It is a really great question. So Sanjita, if you want to go ahead and come off of mute, introduce yourself and ask your question.
Hi, I'm Sanjita. I'm a junior at Heinzer College, and I think Joe may have touched upon this, but I wanted to know what kind of questions should we ask during interviews about a company's diversity and inclusion, and what kind of answers should we be looking for to fit what we want?
So who'd love to take a stab at that question?
I would say I'll take a stab at it. I would say you want to ask questions that are pointed to understanding the culture within the organization. So tell me a little bit about your staff advancement program. Tell me a little bit about how you support the staff that wants to develop, go to school, or continuing education. And you want to ask, if you were to ask the last person that had this job about this job, what would they say? So you want to kind of get a breath of, one, you want to read the person that you're talking to ensure that they're not uncomfortable answering the question, because that's a red flag. But you want to see how they shape that response, and if they start to forego information about the culture of the company and tell you, oh, well, we have this program, this is what we do for our staff. You want to see that excitement, because that means that is a thoughtful organization that really and they want to be an ambassador of that program. So I would just engage in that conversation, and you're really trying to read the person that you're talking to get an idea of how do they feel about the company.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And we are at time for today's event. There were so many great gems that were dropped. I hope you all took notes. I hope you all really take in this advice. You have a very great panel today that really shared some really great pieces around how you can feel included in corporate. And I'll pass this off to Cody, for any last minute words for the Paragon One team.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Rashida. And thank you to all of our panelists. We are so thrilled to have had this opportunity with you. Before we close out today, I want to remind everyone to open the Zoom chat and check out the links that have been shared throughout today's webinar. There are 2 more Bridges webinars available to you and your peers. Make sure you attend, you refer others. They are Friday at 2 p.m. Eastern Time, and a reminder to check out more opportunities to learn skills and build great experiences with our remote externships, which you can find in the Zoom chat below. So thank you, everyone. Have a great Friday and enjoy your weekend.